Right, that ends Northern Ireland questions. We're now coming to questions to the Prime Minister. I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question, and then we'll call Kim Johnson. So, Prime Minister, your engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It will be 3 years tomorrow since a chemical weapon was deployed by Russian military intelligence on the streets of Salisbury. All our thoughts remain with those affected, their families and loved ones, and we will continue to seek justice for them. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure this House will want to pay tribute to the people of Salisbury and Amesbury and wish them well for the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
I said to Kim Johnson. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liverpool is a welcoming city, the oldest Chinese community in Europe, but in 1946, the British government ordered the forced repatriation of thousands of Chinese seamen living in Liverpool with their British families back to China, causing lasting emotional trauma. Many of those descendants still live in my Liverpool Riverside constituency. Will the Prime Minister take steps to acknowledge these events and provide the descendants with a formal apology and for the justice they deserve? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I have happy memories of my own visits to Liverpool, and I can tell her that we are certainly very grateful across the country to the Chinese community for their amazing contribution, and her message has been heard loud and clear.
Right, let's head to John Stevenson. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Pereri factory in Carlisle employs around 800 people, contributes hundreds of millions of pounds to the local economy, and is an exporter. Its location is a consequence of regional economic policy from 50 years ago. Would the Prime Minister agree that if we are to rebalance the economy, level up the country, we need a modern-day proactive regional economic policy? And if he does agree, will he come to Carlisle to see the old and new in action?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for what he says, and he will hear more in just half an hour or so. Let's try and keep it to half an hour, Mr. Speaker, from the Chancellor about how exactly we intend to make sure we build back better across the whole of this country and unleash the tremendous potential of the whole of the United Kingdom, including, of course, Carlisle, which he so well represents.
The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about the Salisbury atrocity? Does the Prime Minister agree with President Biden that the sale of arms that could be used in the war in Yemen should be suspended?
Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, ever since the tragic conflict in Yemen broke out, this country has scrupulously followed the consolidated guidance of which he will be well aware.
Keir Starmer.
The trouble is that whilst President Biden has suspended arms sales that could be used in Yemen, the UK hasn't. In fact, we sold £1.4 billion of arms to Saudi Arabia in 3 months last year, including bombs and missiles that could be used in Yemen. Given everything we know about the appalling humanitarian cost of this war, with innocent civilians caught between the Saudi coalition and the Houthi rebels, why does the Prime Minister think it's right to be selling these weapons?
Mr. Speaker, the UK is part of an international coalition following the UN resolutions, which he will know well, which are very clear that the legitimate government of Yemen was removed illegally. Those are the resolutions that we follow, and we continue scrupulously to follow the humanitarian guidance, which are amongst the toughest measures anywhere in the world in respect of all arms sales. He talks about humanitarian relief, Mr. Speaker, and actually I think the people of this country can be hugely proud of what we are doing to support the people of Yemen. Almost £1 billion of aid contributed in the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he says the system's very robust in relation to arms sales. It can't be that robust. The government lost a court case just 2 years ago in relation to arms sales. The truth is the UK is increasingly isolated in selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Despite what's happening in Yemen, despite Saudi Arabia's human rights record, and the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a murder the US has concluded was approved by the Saudi Crown Prince. So I have to ask, what will it take for the Prime Minister to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
Mr. Speaker, we could condemn the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. We continue to call for a full investigation into the causes of his death, and indeed we have already sanctioned 20 people, Mr. Speaker, in Saudi Arabia. And I repeat the point that I have made, that the UK government continues to follow the consolidated guidance, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, was set up by the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, to make matters worse, the government decided this week to halve international aid to Yemen. Halve it. The UN has said that Yemen faces the worst famine the world has seen for decades. And the Secretary-General said on Monday that cutting aid would be, in his words, a death sentence for the people of Yemen. How on earth can the Prime Minister justify selling arms to Saudi Arabia and cutting aid to people starving in Yemen?
Mr. Speaker, it is under this government that we have increased aid spending to the highest proportion in the history of our country. And yes, it is true that current straitened circumstances, which I'm sure the people of this country understand, mean that temporarily we must reduce aid spending. But that does not obscure the fact, Mr. Speaker, that when it comes to our duty to the people of Yemen, we continue to step up to the plate. A contribution of £214 million for this financial year. There are very few other countries in the world, Mr. Speaker, that have such a record, that is setting such an example in spending and supporting the people of Yemen.
Keir Starmer.
This week, the government halved our international aid to Yemen. If this is what the Prime Minister thinks global Britain should look like, he should think again. And if he doesn't believe me, doesn't like it from me, or the UN Secretary-General, he should listen to his own MPs. Just this morning, the Conservative MP for Bournemouth East said, cutting support to starving children is not what global Britain should be about. It undermines the very idea of the UK as a nation to be respected on the global stage. And the honourable member for Sutton Coldfield said this was unconscionable. Will the Prime Minister now do the right thing and reconsider this urgently?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat, we've given £1 billion since the conflict began. We're in support of UN resolutions. This year, we're contributing another £214 million to support the people of Yemen. There are very few other countries in the world, Mr. Speaker, that have that kind of record. I think in these tough, straitened circumstances, bearing in mind the immense cost of the COVID epidemic that has affected our country, I think the people of this country should be very, very proud of what we are doing.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, Britain should be a moral force for good in the world. But just as the US is stepping up, the UK is stepping back. If the Prime Minister and Chancellor are so determined to press ahead with their manifesto-breaking cuts to international aid, cutting the budget to 0.5%, they should at least put that to a vote in this House. Will he have the courage to do so?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our agenda of delivering for the people of this country and spending more than virtually any other country in the world. By the way, spending more still than virtually any other country in the G7 on aid. It's a record, I think, of which this country can be proud. Given the difficulties that this country faces, Mr. Speaker, I think that the people of this country will think that we've got our priorities right. He can't work out, Mr. Speaker, what his priorities are. 1 minute he's backing us on the roadmap. The next week he's turning his back on us. One week, well, he can't even address a question on the issues of the hour. He's going to have he could have asked anything about the coronavirus pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Instead, he's consecrated his questions. Entirely to the interests of the people of Yemen, Mr. Speaker. We are doing everything we can to support the people of Yemen, given the constraints that we face. We're getting on, Mr. Speaker, with a cautious but irreversible roadmap to freedom, which I hope that he will support. And very shortly, Mr. Speaker, you will be hearing a budget for recovery.
I think I